Hello folks, this is David Hurley of EasyChessTips.com talking to you about a game I recently played as white, leading with d4 against my regular opponent. And this game developed into a semi-Slav struggle, but it didn't follow the main lines of the semi-Slav after a few moves. And in fact, there was a key blunder by black. A queenside castle, which left his defences open. But even after that, there was a bit of a struggle before I could achieve a victory in the 41st move. Before the blunder, in fact, I had lost the advantage that I had maintained for quite a few moves. So the queenside blunder occurs in the 15th move, but at move 14, and my 15th move, black had actually gained a small but quite significant advantage with a lot of control of this diagonal here, and this square here was under threat. So we'll see how it played out and what we could have done differently to improve our game. So I led with d4, and we come into the semi-Slav by this route: d4, d5, c4, c6, knight to c3. It doesn't look like it's going to be the semi-Slav at this stage. There's a change in the move order. We get to the semi-Slav by, what's that word called? Transmogrification. Transposition, that's it. By transposition in this move here. So now we are in the semi-Slav. And you can see here that Lichess is recommending that I move my knight to f3, which is in fact one of the recommended moves, or the recommended move in this layout by our man John Watson, Strategic Chess Opening Repertoire, which I again and again refer to. But I didn't play that move, even though it is actually in my my chess mnemonic memory system. This pattern leads to what's called the map. The anti-Meran map is what I call it. Where's it gone? The anti-Meran map, number 39 in the semi-Slav. So 39. Where is it? 39 is the map. That's M for 3 and P for 9 gives us the map. But I haven't remembered this much of the repertoire yet, the mnemonic repertoire. I'm still groveling around in the lower regions. Had I got up to the map, I would have remembered, I trust, that the move that I made was not the move in this system. Now, it's not a terrible move. In fact, it's not a bad move at all. It's just that if you're trying to remember a system, you may as well try to play that system. So I led with, or I moved with bishop to d3. Now, it's not a bad move. You can see it doesn't affect the advantage bar in any way at all. I have that very, very slight, I mean, the game is effectively equal. I have that slight advantage which white gets in the opening if he doesn't put a foot wrong. And here, even with this move, not the move I would have chosen if I had remembered the map, the anti-Meran setup that John Watson speaks about. One reason why people may not favour this move, although technically it doesn't lead to any big disadvantage or loss of advantage, is because it can lead to this exchange here, where the pawn takes, and now to take back, we have to move our bishop for the second time in 2 moves, which is a loss of tempo. And we can then see this move coming in here to attack the bishop, to make the bishop move 3 times in 3 moves. So by moving the bishop straight to d3 that early in the game, it will cause white to lose tempo if black chooses to attack the bishop. Now, black doesn't always choose to attack the bishop, and even if black does choose to attack the bishop, and even after those 3 moves, or even if even if the bishop moves to d3 instead, back to d3, there is still no great. It's an equal position basically. So, and indeed, what's his name? I forget the master, possibly Marshall or Morphy. One of those masters actually would move the bishop to d3 in one of the d4 opening setups to induce black to take with that pawn. But I don't think that was in this Semi-Slav setup. Anyway, I moved to d3, and here's how I moved my bishop to d3, and my opponent chose not to take, but to move his bishop to d6, making a fairly solid Semi-Slav setup. I mean, Semi-Slav can be a tough nut for white to crack. I proceed with b3. The aim of b3 is to shore up this pawn here, so that if black does decide to take the pawn, instead of taking with the bishop, there's the option of taking with the b pawn. I will show you now the anti-Meran setup that John Watson recommends. So if we go back to e6, which introduces the Semi-Slav by transposition, what is recommended next by John Watson, the anti-Meran setup, is knight to f3, as I said. Black shows he's willing to play what's called the anti-Meran system by moving knight to d7. Then we get that b3 move. It's an important move in this setup because it protects this pawn here, as I have mentioned. We then get that move, which my opponent made a bit earlier, bishop to d6. We then have bishop to e2 and the two kings castle. And this is the anti-Meran setup for white. We won't go into what the Meran system itself is at this stage. We'll perhaps make another video about that later. But anyway, for now, this is the setup that John Watson recommends in this kind of Semi-Slav game. However, our game developed differently, as I led instead with the early bishop to d3. We had bishop to d6. Then we have that b6 move. Then we had queen to c7. Black is aiming to put pressure on this weakly defended pawn down here, my h2 pawn. However, you can see one of the recommendations that Lichess is making is actually what I did. I advanced my f pawn, which pretty much shuts down that threat, and it gets me some. It helps me to fight for control of the center. We then had the knight b to d7 move. I developed that knight, and then we have bishop to b4, which I think is one of the moves that Lichess was looking at just a little bit earlier. It may bring it up again. Anyway, bishop to b4. Now, white has built up a little bit more of an advantage here, but still, it's a fairly equal game. I'm quite happy with my setup, I think, at the moment. Yeah, I bring my queen out to c2. This is a fairly standard square for the queen in this kind of setup. And now I'm eyeing black's h7 pawn, which is defended by black's f6 knight, which I'm trying to make a target of my development and my attack. We then have a6, and I develop my bishop and give my king some extra cover. I'm not too willing to castle, even though at times, like here, Lichess is recommending that I castle. I'm not too keen on castling behind those two pawns, and in fact, in this game, I didn't castle at all. We then have the bishop comes back, and I jump in with my knight here. I'm wondering if I can induce the d7 knight to take, and it becomes an unfavorable. I believe it becomes an unfavorable exchange. I haven't actually checked this. So yeah, you can see by taking, my advantage significantly increases, and I now have a nice extra play which forces this knight away. Let's move him down there. And then if I wish, I can attack this pawn here. But this kind of attack, although it looks as if I have a nice barrage on this pawn, it's not necessarily as great as it seems. Let's just show you why. I'll take the pawn, and there's this good old bishop trap here. What I end up getting, it's not such a bad exchange. Actually, I get 3 pawns for a bishop, which is about equal, and I also get this threatening queen coming in here to pick up that 3rd pawn, making it a relatively equal exchange. You can see here that Lichess believes I've maintained my advantage with that exchange. A bishop or a knight for 3 pawns, depending on the situation on the board, but in sheer material terms, is considered an equal exchange. However, that would only have occurred had we had black taken the bait and gone for the bishop exchange. But my opponent, I guess, realized that it was not an equal exchange. I mean, equal in material terms, but leading to the problem down here with a weakly defended pawn. So my opponent instead did the most recommended move by Lichess and moved his pawn to b6. I guess the pawn to b6, what's it doing? It's putting pressure on the c5 square, and perhaps preparing for an attack. It is indeed preparing for an attack on the center, as we'll see in a moment. What do we have here? Yeah, okay, I've just gone through that. So b6. So Lichess still wants me to castle, but I'm resistant to the idea of castling, and instead I'm preparing for this attack, my attack on the knight, the thing that I want to achieve in this setup. We have that move of c5 attacking the center, or challenging for control of the center. But I decide, instead of taking, I want to reroute my knight. Now, it's not a move that Lichess particularly recommends. Lichess doesn't seem to favor it very much. On the other hand, it's not a terrible lurch of the advantage bar. It does create, as you can see, it weakens my grip on the center here. Black could hop his knight in, though it would be an exchange of knight for a bishop, which of course would be weakening my grip on this diagonal here, the b1 h7 diagonal. But that did not happen. We had instead a liquidation of pawns, or a partial liquidation of pawns in the center. So there's that b3 pawn now able to take on c4, keeping my bishop firmly on this diagonal. We have bishop to b7. Now this is the strong move of the game. I think this is Black's best moment of the game. Black is now looking right down this diagonal. Got a queen here which can become active as well, depending on what this knight does. Yes, we also have the option down here, this file here. It's not an open file, but it can soon become an open file if the pawn can challenge my f4 pawn, or perhaps come down and challenge this pawn down here later. So there's a bit of pressure coming down this side, which is precisely why I didn't want to castle a few moves ago. Though, of course, Lichess recommending that castle means it probably would have been okay to do. But I didn't like the look of castling on the king's side. And I also didn't like the look, actually, of castling on the queen's side either, because this open diagonal here. The king would castle into an open diagonal with this bishop having a look once this pawn has moved off. And so I kept my king firmly in the center. So now I'm faced with this problem of what to do about this threat down here to my unprotected pawn. And I did something which is perhaps my weakest move of the game from Lichess's point of view. But if I didn't want to castle, if you're not going to castle, you want to protect that pawn from the bishop. I moved my rook across, rook to g1. I was also thinking later, I was expecting actually a kingside castle. So I was thinking that it does place me on a nice, places my rook on a nice file for a future attack. I've still got ideas of advancing with this pawn up to attack the knight. So for me, this seemed like the best move, given that the other alternative, if I want to save that pawn, would have been to castle. So that's what I did. Lichess doesn't like it. You can see now black has indeed built up an advantage. So kudos to black for playing a good opening game and coming into the middle game now with a small but fairly significant advantage. However, things fell apart rather, though there was a bit of a revival, but things fell apart in the next move. So I have just played rook to b1, and we then have the disastrous move of the game for black. You can see Lichess is recommending that kingside castle. Black decides to castle on the queen side, and you can see it's an absolute disaster. The response is immediate. I think only glanced really at the board and just went for it. I didn't hesitate. So a queenside castle, complete disaster, because it leaves this f7 pawn completely undefended, and not only that, it also forks the rooks. So from this single blunder, I think a game which was a game where black had good chances in this game, they were thrown away by a blunder here. From here, now I now have a material advantage. I've taken a pawn and a rook for a knight, so I now have a significant material advantage. And in that case, with not so much time on the clock, maybe we had 15 minutes or so left, I thought I had been playing this game quite quickly, but actually I had less time on the clock than my opponent. I decide simply to swap off wherever I can, even though it opens up my position a little too much. We get these swap off wherever we can. I've jumped my knight in to see whether there'll be a bishop for knight exchange, keep swapping off as I have a material advantage. My opponent resists that, and he sees that move, this move which Lichess is looking at here, attacks the knight with his pawn, but there is the perfect riposte, which is to move my knight into e6, attacking both the queen and the bishop. The queen indeed moves up, but I will grab that bishop for that nice exchange. It also, my opponent took with the pawn, leading, that actually I think is weakens his structure. It would have been better to have taken with the knight to keep the pawns together. What black ends up with here is a very disrupted pawn. I don't think you can call it a structure. You've got one, the pawns are not helping each other. There's three lone pawns and the 2 pawns down here. So although black still has 5 pawns, there are 4 pawn islands, which is quite difficult to defend. You could say that I also have 4 pawn islands as well, but actually I can connect up these 4 here. They can all connect up in some way. So I actually really only have 3 pawn islands. Plus I also have an advantage in material. I have 6 pawns to 5. So taking with the pawn there breaks things up further for black. It's really creating too many holes for black to maintain his position. So let's get rid of that. Okay. So I continue swapping off. Now, my king's position here, there is some air opening up, and although I've just talked about pawn islands, I'm quite happy to create a fourth pawn island by that swap off. I think that I will be okay. They're still recommending me to castle, and I'm still unwilling to castle at this stage. So the queen is on this rather worrying diagonal here. So that pawn swap off, it's a bit risky, but still a major advantage. It's tracked back a little bit because I'm swapping off material, opening up my own position. Perhaps not playing, well, definitely not playing the ideal moves every time, but I have my basic plan, which is swap off material as I have a material advantage. And get your rook onto a nice file. The queen comes in, so there's that check, which I mentioned before, but it's okay. You can see with my rook to b1 move, it's not a move that Lichess likes, probably because I haven't castled with this threatening queen over here. There is this threat. If we just have a quick look at this, if the queen should come down here, my rook is unprotected, and so there is a bit of a risk. There we go. The bishop comes in to attack, or perhaps the queen could even do that. And so black is trying to build up something of an attack. You can see the advantage is diminishing, but I think I have enough to hit back and to preserve my king. But it was not a clear-cut victory at this stage. So anyway, I moved my king to e1, and we then had the bishop coming in to claim that pawn. However, it's not. I don't think it's the best move here. Lichess is not recommending it at all. And the problem is, as I see it, is that it's kind of pinning the queen. The queen is sort of pinned to my rook. Anyway, let's move on and see what happens. How does this develop, this rather tricky situation with white with a clear advantage, but with a rather exposed king, a king sitting in the center? Yeah, so I didn't have too much time on my clock. I was worried about the queen and the bishop coming into close proximity of the king. The black's other two pieces are a long way away, and they're knights, so that's quite helpful to me. But still, I was a bit worried that I don't know, if let's suppose I do something like this, and we then have this option here. Doesn't black, oh, perhaps black does not win. Black does not win the rook, and white maintains his advantage. I was worried about it, but I didn't have too much time to think about what I was doing. So I decided that, let's go back to the check. I decided that the best thing for me to do would be to give back some material. So we had over here earlier the rook knight exchange in my favor. So down here I pay it back with this little exchange. Rook takes bishop, queen takes rook. Lichess is a bit worried about that. It looks as if we're approaching equality, but with further insight, we're not. I think that things are okay for me. I move my queen to b2. Now here, Lichess actually gives black a small advantage. So am I frittering away my position? The reason is that I'm looking for a way to hit the king down here and perhaps get hold of the, pick up this extra rook. But these squares are quite well protected by black, well, especially the two where we want to go to attack the king. If I put my queen here, it will fall to the queen, and the king is protecting his queen from the rook, so my rook will go down and I will suddenly be behind in material. If I send the queen straight in to b8, well, the knight is protecting that square. So although I've made myself a barrage down here, it may or it may not be such an effective barrage. It really depends on the next move. Now, we saw earlier there was a disaster for black with the queenside castle. It looks here as if black has weathered the storm. Now, if black plays very carefully, this game could go down to the wire. There's only about 7 or 8 minutes left on the clock, on my clock. Black has got more time to think. But black is worried about his exposed king. And this leads to the ultimate disaster from which there is no recovery. You can see that Lightes is recommending get your queen back or bring your rook out to a strong file. Do something like that. Instead, my opponent is looking for a way to get his king away, and this is a disaster, as you can see. By moving the king onto the black square, c7, it opens things up for me to get in lots of lovely checks. Indeed, bishop to a5, the king moves, and the queen falls. So this is what black had not seen at all. It's that actually there is a hidden attack. So this diagonal here was actually very important, and black moves straight into it. Difficult to see when there's not much time on the clock, but that is a very nasty trap, which black walked straight into. Bang, bang, goodbye queen, pretty much end of game. We played on. Like so. I get in a check, and there's now multiple checks, but turns out that I was quite inefficient again at achieving checkmate, as we will see. Black comes across. What am I doing here? So not the recommended move by, well, it doesn't matter too much. I bring my bishop down onto an active file to, I'm still looking at swapping off some material. Another blunder. The knight now falls with that check. And the king runs for safety, still hoping perhaps to pick up a silly move on my part with the rook. But I have a way back. I put my bishop back on that first diagonal, and black moves back. I don't want to rotate. Now I do that move, pinning the knight to the king, and grab the pawn. My opponent thought he could take back for a moment with the knight, but the knight is firmly pinned to the king. So the king runs away, but that just means I pick up the knight. So the game is collapsing. Now here is the first. Now this looks like a very nice pickup. I grab the last piece with my queen and get check. What could be better than that? Well, one thing that could be better than that, which I totally missed, is checkmate. This move I completely missed. I grabbed the rook with a check. Now, if you want to finish the game in a nice, economical and pleasing way, this kind of checkmate is very nice. The queen does not need to take the rook. The queen has checkmate here. The king can't move anywhere. The king has had it. This bishop here guards the f5 square. End of game. But I, in my greedy haste, grabbed the rook instead and prolonged the game. We then have the king running off to g5, and I check with my bishop. The king moves in, and now we have another case where I miss checkmate for the second time by moving my rook up. At first, it looked like checkmate. There's nowhere where the king can go. The king cannot come to here because of the bishop. h4, he can't come to g4 because of the pawn. He can't move back because of the queen. He can't move along this this row because of the rook. So my opponent would thought it was checkmate, but you can advance the pawn, at which point I took with the rook. Now, to go back to this position, this move here is checkmate. This move is checkmate. The king cannot move to this square because of the bishop. The king cannot move to this square because of the pawn. And of course, he can't move up or down there. And there's nothing to get in the way. So that is the second checkmate that I missed in a matter of a few moves. However, don't panic because checkmate is coming. Not yet, though. So the pawn moved in front. My rook attacks the king. And it's still not checkmate because the king can, in fact, move down. Now, will I see or miss checkmate one more time? No, even I can see this checkmate, bring in my queen, and that is game over. So that was a very enjoyable game, especially from White's point of view. Surviving some less than ideal moves on my part, but the two blunders by Black really killed off the game. Actually, the first blunder, the queenside castle, did not kill off the game. Black managed to get back a small advantage at one stage in the game, but then gave it away with that unfortunate king stepping into a very nasty bishop-queen trap. And from there was no return for Black. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this game. We're going to continue making these videos, trying to improve our chess and anybody else's who is around a similar kind of level to us. And just enjoy the game of chess and see if we can improve. That's all from me, David Hurley of EasyChessTips.com. Until the next exciting chess video.